Hello good folks, my name is Leif Westerholm and I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel called Devs and Dice. This show is called Boxes of Shame, where I each week take one of my grey miniatures and bring it to life with paints and let you in on the process. This week's video is the third of a 5-part series where I paint the young chromatic dragons from Wizkids. If you missed the previous episodes where I painted the white and the green dragon, then have a look up there. Now this week's miniature. Let's just say that I did some things I'm not proud of and some huge mistakes, but it turned out well in the end, because similar to the nature of a blue dragon, I did not give up. I endured. Until I had something that, was halfway decent. Before we look at the process, I want to do a shout out to Army Painter. They provided me with a whole bunch of tools and material to, enable me to complete all of the 5 chromatic dragons. So thank you, Army Painter. Now with that out of the way, let's see how I ended up painting this blue dragon.
A couple of years ago I started getting into D&D. As my passion for D&D grew, so did my collection of minis, and like many others out there, I now have boxes of shame. This is me painting every single one of my miniatures.
Right folks, so this is the young blue dragon from Wizkids Miniatures. One thing I noticed instantly was that this dragon actually came with a sort of transparent lightning, which was kind of cool. Inspecting the model early, it looked kind of nice. At this point I liked the model. You'll see how that changed. I cleaned up a little bit of the mold lines, and there weren't that many, and I started laying in some base coats using Army Painter's Deep Blue. As usual, I go in with thin coats. I think it was like 3 coats of this until I got a nice even coverage. Then it's over to the airbrush booth where I'm going to spray on a sort of highlight of crystal blue from Army Painter. Then I used some blue tone from Army Painter. This is a wash, and I used it all over the dragon, but primarily tried to focus it on areas where I wanted to get some nice shadow definition. Then as a first layer of highlight, I'm coming back in with that crystal blue. Now I'm doing this especially on the wings where I wanted to get a little bit more textured finish, and then eventually I go over all of the dragon, all of the blue parts where I want to highlight or call out things. So all of the, muscles, everything, doing a basic highlight. Now for this highlight, I'm actually using a larger brush. That's the way I prefer to work, because this is a first highlight, so I like to use a larger brush with a round tip. And for this I'm using Army Painter's Monster brush, which actually was quite nice. Now I am coming in with Troglodyte blue and Voidshield blue. I tended to mix these colors. They were fairly close to each other, but there were some subtle differences. But I found that a mixture of them was nice for the next layer of highlight. And this I'm doing with a much more sort of accurate brush. So here I'm just picking out the details and making, everything pop a little bit more. Alright, so now I'm gonna venture into Divided Country. I'm using Desert Yellow, and I am going to be using this on the horn and on the underside of the wings. Looking at a lot of concept art, I could see that there are really 2 schools about this. Some put, this color on the top of the wings, some painted, all of the wings blue. I decided to do this one, so I guess there's 3 schools of thought. Tell me in the comments which one you like. This was my personal favorite. Then I also put in that same desert yellow on all of the plates. Now here it became a little bit interesting, because the plates went from the chest to the tail, but the belly section really didn't have defined plates, so I decided to start sort of fading them out. Now I'm adding mid-brown as a wash from Army Painter to all of the areas where I previously painted desert yellow. Now I'm coming in with some skeleton bone to start highlighting and really catching the top ridges on the horn and, on the different areas on the belly and chest plates as well. Here I'm just trying to catch the ridges of the different chest plates. Now, as I said, this wash worked well on the more defined parts. I, of course, made a mistake and used it on the wings, which are large and flat. So I had to go back in with the airbrush, and I basically just airbrushed in desert yellow. Now, I tried to keep some of the shadows at the edges of the membranes, because that I thought looked kind of good. Now I'm going to introduce Corpse Pale, and I'm going to use this as one step lighter highlight on the horn and on the chest plates. I'm also adding scar tissue to the palette, and I'm going to use this on the mouth, and I had to do probably 3 coats of this. Now I'm adding a little bit of matte white for that top highlight on the horn, and I think I actually only left it on the horn. I didn't go over the chest plates, but what I did do was paint the eyes in. At this point the scar tissue had dried, so I came in with some red tone just to give it a little bit more vibrance and automatic shadows and highlights almost. While the red tone was drying, I figured I would start painting the teeth, and I did this basically using the same colors I've used for the brighter parts. So first in with desert yellow to get that grime, and the teeth weren't that well defined, to be honest, so it was kind of hard to pick them out. But then I go back in with skeleton bone as a first highlight, and then eventually I mix up a little, or actually I think I used Corpse Pale for that brightest highlight. I might have mixed in some matte white just to sort of make the teeth pop a little bit more. Blue dragons seem to me like they have a better dental care than most dragons. Putting in some matte black, and I'm just painting all of the claws on the dragon. Now there were some small little spots on the ears that I wanted to highlight, and I'm using Gorgon hide from Army Painter just to sort of bring some attention and some detail to the face. At this point, I consider myself being pretty much done with the actual dragon miniature, so I focused on the bolt of lightning. Now I used my vise from Army Painter, my drill, and actually just drilled a small hole at the bottom of the bolt of lightning. This will enable me to pin this using just, you know, a bent out paper clip. Now when it came to painting the bolt of lightning, I used some Liquitex deep blue turquoise, I think it is, or deep turquoise. The good thing about inks is the fact that they remain fully transparent. And that just, you know, takes advantage of the transparency bit of it, so it's nice. Okay, shifting focus to the base. I didn't like this decorative base at all. It had an overhang and it just sat weird on the black base. So I brought out some MDF, and using Army Painter's drill and file, I managed actually to get a hole that would fit the transparent bit fairly snug. But yeah, I liked to, you know, start at an empty canvas. Here you can see that I have actually drawn a plan onto it, and I'm sort of just trying stuff out. But first things first, I used Army Painter Super Glue and Activator just to fix that transparent base. So the plan is to have a sea, a beach, and a mountain. And I pinned this, and then I just primed it using Army Painter's black. Now I'm going in with Banshee brown and Hemp rope. This is going to be my first sort of dry brush colors on the mountain range. And the mountain range, like you probably know by now, it's made from pine bark that I got at my local gardening store. Once the dry brush had dried, I came in with that wash that I created the last time just to get some shadow definition in there. Now, the next steps to this base was to glue it, and I just used Army Painter's Battlefield basing glue. Now I just put it on there, and I added a clamp just to make sure that it will bond properly with the MDF. And this also enabled me to meanwhile work on the rest of it. So I'm going to use the same glue, Battlefield basing glue, and I'm going to add some of that brown base in it. I'm going to make a paste. The reason why I'm doing this is because I wanted this base to go from a mountaintop to sort of, you know, rubble to beach and sea. So this actually had to slope, essentially, like you can see in here. So I had to build it up like that. Now the next step, once that had sort of set and dried a little bit, I used the same Battlefield basing glue, and I didn't actually have any sand that was fine enough, so I had to go out and scavenge the playgrounds in Stockholm. But I got some play sand eventually, which would do the job to sort of, you know, look like a beach somewhat. However, the color was off. And you can see I also covered the entire base with a diluted glue just to lock everything into place. At this point I'm coming in with hemp rope and desert yellow, and this was really the saving grace. And I'm coming in with a fairly diluted coat, because really what I'm after is to just tint everything. I would like some variation, but just tint it. Once that had dried, I come in with some corpse pale, which to me felt like a, you know, beach kind of color, and I'm stippling this in, and then I'm wet blending that with a little bit of desert sand just to get a nice gradient going there. And that's what it looks like once it's dry. Now I'm coming in with Arid earth, and I'm really just trying to dry brush the entire base and get some highlights working on the base, and I'm being very, very gentle with the brush here. And once that had dried, I come in with some light tone from Army Painter. This I'm just putting all over the base. This just helps everything to, I feel like, you know, it brings everything together. It's like the rug in the Big Lebowski. It really brings everything together and gives some more shadow definition. Now next up I'm going to start painting the sea. For this I found out deep blue and angel green. Mixing those two makes a perfect color for sea. And then I'm going to use that royal cloak to sort of fade it up towards the beach where it gets a little bit brighter. So I'm really moving fast here. I'm using my poor old hobby brush, and that's probably because I was mostly stippling and I was abusing the shit out of that brush. And then as a final touch, I just come in back with that light tone and make the sand around the water a little bit darker. And this is what it looks like when it's dry. Now it's time to get to the scary bits. I took some, what do you call it, masking tape that you use when you're like painting rooms and whatnot. I was going to use some UV resin that I found at the art store. This was the first time I've ever used that, but I figured, you know, I'm going to use some of that turquoise ink and I'm going to mix it. I don't really care about the bubbles because that's fine, because this is going to be at the shoreline, so it's fine if it's a little bit violent. And so far so good. I do pour from, you know, a little bit elevated position just to get rid of some bubbles. You know, it evens, it gets, you know, in the right places. And then it's time to hit it with the UV torch. And at first I'm like, yeah, this smells bad. And then what is happening in the middle there? I'm not sure if you could see it, but it sort of got swollen up. And here is another shot where basically there's air bubbles underneath the actual resin. I'm not exactly sure what the hell happened, but it was sort of panic state. So I brought out my trusty old gloss Mod Podge, and I actually tried to fill those holes a little bit, but more importantly I actually just put Mod Podge all over the surface, and then I used my airbrush, just the air, there's no paint in there, just to sort of try to get nice texture on the actual sort of surface of the water, because this will dry fully transparent. Now while everything was drying, I figured I would do some parts like that have washed up on the beach. So I just took some coffee stir sticks, similar to how I did the collaboration, which you can check up in the corner now. I go in with werewolf brown, and then some hemp, and then some stone gray. Just dry brush that. You've seen me do this before. Then I just added it to the scene, and then that's sort of what it looks like when it was dry. Time to add some wonderful tufts. So I went with mountain tufts and wasteland tufts. And I just placed them here and there, and I actually also tried to cut one in half, which was kind of nice because then I could sort of place it up to the side of a mountain. Let's look at the final results though, shall we?
Alright folks, that's officially 3 dragons down and 2 more to go. Now one thing you might have noticed, I did these waves somehow, but I failed to tell you how I did it. And well, simply put, I forgot to turn on the camera. My bad. But the good thing is that it's super easy. What I used was gloss heavy gel from Liquitex. It's a gloss gel that will dry fully transparent if you apply it bit by bit. And yeah, that was a couple of hours of building up. So what did you think about the end result? Was it good? Okay? Nah, not really-ish? Please tell me in the comments section down below. If you like what I'm doing here, then please consider liking, subscribing, or sharing my videos. It really helps the channel out. Now it is time to bestow some wisdom from ancient times. Time for Swedish proverbs from old times. Man ska inte kasta sten I glashus. The direct translation is something like this. One should not throw rocks in a glass house. Now in Swedish, this is a way of saying don't, criticize someone for something you might be guilty of yourself. Alright, so with that, I want to thank you for watching. I hope you have an awesome day. Stay safe out there and yeah, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Until next time.